Hello and welcome. I'm Joshua Henney. Today I'm talking one-on-one with Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop, Democratic candidate for New Jersey governor. Mayor Fulop, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time. You're a little busy these days, I'm guessing, right?
A little bit. It's happy to be here, though, Josh.
Super. Let's start with the big picture, the obvious question. You know, you've been mayor of Jersey City for over a decade, almost 12 years now. You almost ran for governor a few years ago, didn't quite pull the trigger, wasn't the time. What makes now the time to throw your hat in the ring to be governor?
So the honest answer is I made a mistake in 2017 in the sense that when I was elected in 2005 to the council, I ran outside the traditional political party. And then in 2013, I ran against the political party to change Jersey City. And when people started to talk about me running for governor in 2017, I was convinced, or I allowed myself to be convinced, so I bear the responsibility, that I needed these relationships with these party bosses or brokers. So I started to facilitate them a little bit. And as I got closer to kind of thinking through the mechanics of an election, it just didn't feel right to me, is the honest answer. And I felt that these people would have abandoned me, and I didn't feel like it was a place that I could have been true to myself. And so I endorsed Phil Murphy. It was a bitter pill to swallow at the time. I was like
I'm sure.
I felt like I did a lot of work, and I felt like I didn't feel comfortable with George Norcross and Steve Sweeney running New Jersey. So I thought Phil Murphy was the best option, and I endorsed him. And I said to myself, if I was ever going to get another opportunity to run, which you don't know, it was 8 years away,
it's a lifetime.
I would do it differently. And I'm fortunate today I have that opportunity, and I'm doing it the way I would have liked to do it, true to my values.
So I guess, how would New Jersey look differently now, 8 years later, if it was Governor Fulop?
Very. I mean, I think truthfully, Phil has been a decent governor. He's done some things that were low-hanging fruit post Chris Christie. I think that he hasn't been really bold enough, to be honest with you. I think that he has facilitated a lot of the political status quo. I felt like he could have gone further on things like the minimum wage, things like earlier on the cannabis regulations, things like New Jersey Transit, affordability. I mean, when you look back at Phil Murphy's tenure after 20 years from now, and you say, this guy was here for 8 years, I would ask you, what is he going to be synonymous with as a major accomplishment? And I think most executives that are really effective have one or two things that they're synonymous with. Like Rudy Giuliani, before he went crazy, was synonymous with crime in New York, and Bloomberg with no smoking in bars. And you could talk about McGreevey with insurance and Pinelands and Highlands, and Florio talking about taxes,
sure.
And I would say, what is the thing that Phil Murphy has pushed outside of the status quo? So I think he's been okay. He's been good on women's reproductive rights. Been good on guns. He's been good on the pension, and I think there's other places that he has room to be desired.
Okay. Well, you can make a difference that way if you become governor.
For sure.
So, I've gotten your campaign literature, seen a lot of the interviews. You talk a lot about how this campaign is not about slogans, it's about fixing what's broken.
Yes.
So after these 8 years, or actually after 16 years with Christie before that, what would you do on day one as governor?
Well, look, I think there's a lot to do on day one. I think that the starting point is New Jersey Transit, okay? And there's a lot of things you can do. It's a core part of our platform. I have more experience with transportation than any other candidate, and more experience than probably the governor himself. I mean, we built the largest microtransit system in the country in Jersey City. We're in the ferry business, the bike share business.
Got the path right there.
Got the path. I mean, we know a thing or two about this. Number one is the tax that they put in place, corporate business tax. It was an idea that actually came from our policy paper, Josh. Was only for 5 years. It needs to be fixed so that it's in perpetuity. So you could bond against that to upgrade train stations and bus stations so that people feel good when they go there. You need to cancel the Turnpike widening project. I mean, that was a major disaster. It's $12 billion, and it won't alleviate anything. You need to reappropriate those dollars to mass transit.
And you're different than other candidates running for governor on that, right?
On that, totally. And on congestion pricing, and on the surcharge. I mean, all of this is probably different than the others. I was a supporter of congestion pricing because I think if you care about the environment or health issues or mass transit issues, and I have a plan to get New York back to the table.
A reverse congestion pricing you've spoke
that's
about?
The leverage point. And Jack Ciattarelli actually stole my idea because it was a good idea. He talks about it. So, which is fine. I think it's the right thing to do. You get them back to the table, and it's a leverage point. But you ultimately need to put money back into the transit system. And that will give you an opportunity to expand it, and particularly in South Jersey. I mean, if you look at the unemployment issues and the poverty issues in South Jersey, which are different than North Jersey, it's directly tied to the fact that there is no mass transit infrastructure down there. And so if there's one thing in 4 years I want to be synonymous with beyond the affordability crisis and fixing property taxes is really fixing mass transit.
Gotcha. Well, Governor Murphy said he would fix mass transit or die trying.
Yeah.
He's still alive. It's still broken.
Yeah, that was a lie. Yeah. That was a lie. Yeah.
You mentioned property taxes just now. Obviously, they're out of control. Everyone talks about it every year, every campaign year, even not campaign years. Folks are talking about that. People cannot afford to buy homes right now. Retirees are packing up and leaving. What would your plan be to make it affordable for working families?
So the affordability conversation is a big one in New Jersey. It's not one thing, right? Housing costs are directly tied to supply. So you have a lot of demand, not enough supply, prices are going up. You need to build more housing. Nobody's built more housing in New Jersey than Jersey City, so we have familiarity with that. We would restructure the EDA incentive programs to support more suburban municipalities so that they feel that the construction is more consistent with how the municipality feels. I think that you got to wrestle the conversation away from the NIMBYs by having more transparency in the conversation. Trenton needs to tie dollars around education, infrastructure, sewers to those mayors that are actually building.
Stuff you've done in Jersey City.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that there's ways to increase supply. That's number one. On taxes in general, I think you pay a corruption tax because of the structure in New Jersey. We're the only campaign talking about how to alleviate that corruption tax, and I'm very clear that's our campaign is about that. I think you need some consolidation. Primarily in municipalities is the place to start on shared services, and we have a different approach in order to create leverage on that than anybody else. And I think being a mayor, I have some familiarity on this stuff that nobody else has. So I feel pretty good about it, and I think that we're in a different place on the property taxes than others. And then when you talk about affordability, I mean, healthcare is a big part of it in New Jersey, right?
Yeah,
you have Horizon has a monopoly. I think you need to be honest about that and create kind of competition there. And we're unique in that lane. And then, energy prices, another disaster.
Oh yeah, we'll hit that in a few
minutes
we'll
talk
for
about
sure.
It a little
There's a lot
bit.
to talk about there for sure.
So go ahead. I don't want to.
No. Affordability along that vein still. Seniors, obviously aside from being a large voting bloc, they're a large part of everyone's life, and we're all going to hopefully become one day.
Yes.
But here in New Jersey, seniors a lot of times are being forced out of their communities.
Yeah.
How do you make it that they can afford to stay here so aging is possible and not punishing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, the Stay New Jersey program is well-intentioned, but the governor's never going to fund that. I mean, and you know it by the fact that he said to the legislature when he initially pushed back, he said, okay, I'll agree to this only as long as we implement it the day after I leave office, right? Which will tell you everything you need to know about it. Because if he was actually going to deliver a 50% property tax rebate, he'd be the one to hand deliver a check.
Everyone loves the name of the checks.
Correct. So look, if he funds it, I'm going to implement it. If he doesn't, we're going to restructure an affordability program based largely on income of seniors. So other states puts a cap. So for example, if you make $50,000, you pay 4% of your income towards property taxes, $2,000, and that's it. Just going to say one thing.
Yeah, please.
Fundamentally, I do believe that wherever we land in this program, and affordability is key, that seniors should not be paying the school portion of their property taxes because logically, they're no longer users of that system. And it's a big driver of the affordability crisis. So if you're going to think about where you can alleviate pressure, it's restructuring the formula around how to get seniors out of that component of it. And I think it's definitely doable.
It seems a little like third rail here when you're talking about that sort of thing.
How do you do that? I think that you do that by restructuring a lot of these taxes. So you need to capture wealthier people. Obviously, a millionaire's tax from 20 years ago is no longer a millionaire's tax. You have people obviously abusing the farmland tax credits. I mean, you have a beehive, a couple goats, sell Christmas trees.
A lavender farm we've heard about.
It's $500 million. I mean, you got to be bold on that stuff, and you got to do that in the first 100 days because if you don't do it in the first 100 days, you'll never be able to get that stuff. But that's how you get more revenue in the system, and that'll allow you to do some things around flexibility for the affordability and the more vulnerable people. Seniors is a good example.
At the other end, we see Gen Z and millennials also leaving the state, and those are the folks we want to keep. We don't want to brain drain. We want them to stay here. How do you make it for those folks that they can stay here to live, work, raise a family, start a business, put down stakes?
Why do you think they're leaving, out of curiosity?
Why do I think they're leaving?
Yeah.
I don't know. I came back home from college. You went to school in New York, right? And you came back. So I guess we're two different. We both came back. I think make it a place that you want to stay and can afford to stay.
So that's a good one. I I graduated college. I came back to Jersey City. It was actually where I wanted to live because I was working in New York.
You were from Middlesex County, like myself, right?
Edison, and Rivals, right? I think we have a better chess team, though. I think you're better than us in
Model
everything
UN
else.
we're both
right?
good at. Soccer we beat you. Model UN we're both good at. So we'll take that.
I think that the reality is that I was in a place, I got a great job at a very prestigious investment bank, and I was able to afford a place in Jersey City at the time. And so I moved there. Today, that is not likely, not only in Jersey City, but anywhere in the region. It's a big problem. And that's directly tied to supply, as I touched on earlier. So you need to build more housing, because that's going to compress pricing a little bit, which is helpful. I think there's a job conversation, right, about who and what we're attracting. I think that our economic development and job model in the state of New Jersey is largely focused on moving large corporations away from New York to this side of the river. So, for example, you'll poach like JP Morgan, and that's really just
not small businesses.
It's moving 500 or 1,000 existing jobs. How do you create new jobs is tax credits and incentives to entrepreneurs that are dreamers. I'll give you a quick example, Josh. My parents had a small business. My dad had a deli, and my mom had a immigration services business.
That was in Newark, the deli, right?
In Newark. My younger brother actually started a business which ended up being a global business, $250 million in sales a year. It's a sheet business, bed sheets, okay? And he started it not out of New Jersey largely because of the tax structure here. And you realize that he ended up employing hundreds of people, doing a ton of business, selling bed sheets, which sounds kind of crazy.
It's a different life than you've chosen.
Totally.
That's true.
And I think about the fact that why would you make the decision not to be in New Jersey? And it comes back to taxes and incentives. And our economic model in New Jersey is largely focused on large corporations. And I think that the place that you got to focus on is entrepreneurs early in the process and how they exit, because most of those people, if they sell their company, they want to keep as much as they can, right? And you got to create taxes and incentives for them to be able to do that, and that doesn't work today in New Jersey.
Well, that sounds like a good place to take a quick commercial break, and we will be right back continuing our conversation with Mayor Stephen Fulop in just 1 minute.
When I got home from Iraq, some said I couldn't take on the political machine. They said I couldn't defeat an incumbent mayor, or pass the toughest ethics laws in state history, or take on Bob Menendez, or Donald Trump. And they said I couldn't pass some of the most progressive laws in the country. But since when did anyone in New Jersey let someone else tell them what they can or can't do?
I'm Steve Fulop, and I'll be a governor on nobody's side but yours.
Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Jersey City Mayor and Democratic candidate for governor, Stephen Fulop. So we're back, Mayor. One thing I want to point out is you got a huge endorsement recently from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah.
A bit far from Jersey City, other side of the state.
Yeah.
I'll read it to you here. I'm sure you wouldn't mind hearing it.
Let's hear it.
Fulop embraced the kind of innovative policy solutions that often spook other mayors, and he implemented them effectively, often in the face of strong opposition. That's a refreshing quality. I want to ask you what you think some of those are. I know one of them is earned sick days, paid sick leave. It's law here in New Jersey, but you were the first city in the state to make that a reality, and I think one of the first in the country.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit, and then maybe some other things you're really proud of.
Okay, so I just want to highlight that endorsements are kind of a mixed bag, because in New Jersey, it's kind of this web that we have here of people knowing each other. And there's not more of these editorial boards anymore that do endorsements. The Star Ledger doesn't do it anymore. The New York Times doesn't do it anymore.
You used to see them plastered in mail pieces and TV ads all the time.
Because it's a big deal. It's a big deal because they're not jaded in the sense that somebody might work for somebody on a campaign or have that influence. And so the Philly Inquirer endorsing me after all 6 of us competed, and I'm coming from the most northern part of the state relative to the other 5, tells you a lot that they spoke about what our details and our plans are, and the fact that they recognize that the Renaissance in Jersey City didn't happen by accident. When people say to me, hey, it happens because you're 3 miles away from New York City. I always say the same thing. I said, we've been 3 miles from New York City for 250 years, right? So, I mean, look, the city has transformed, whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it's healthcare, whether it's policy initiatives like you touched on. I mean, we've been the laboratory of change for New Jersey. And a lot of the things that Phil Murphy touts as his biggest accomplishments are things that were first done actually in Jersey City. Paid sick leave, decrim of cannabis, minimum wage, short-term rental. I mean, we had an $8 million fight with Airbnb. It became the model for the state of New Jersey. So I think that we've got a lot to be proud of, but most importantly, there's a lot to learn that we could take to the state. One other thing, I think that the most important skill set for being a governor is being a mayor.
Yeah.
And of course I say that as somebody who's biased, but I think if you look at it practically, there's 564 municipalities in the state of New Jersey. Each has home rule. And you need to understand local government in order to get anything done. And a lot of the dysfunction on affordability in New Jersey is a byproduct that we haven't had a governor that understands local government. And it costs taxpayer every day.
We've had a U.S. attorney,
you have
we've
ambassador,
had ambassador, we've had CEOs. It's been over 20 years
20
since
years.
the last person with mayoral experience.
20 years. And I think that is the most important level of government in New Jersey just because of the home rule component. So, you know, Obama used to talk about insanity is the same thing again and again and again, and knowing it's not effective, and knowing that mayors have huge amount of control and the track record in Jersey City. I think I'm really just uniquely qualified here for
and
this.
On both sides, there's 6 of you running right now for the Democratic side, and there's a few running on the Republican side. Only 2 of you are mayors.
Three.
Three, I'm sorry. You're
Three.
right. Three.
Three.
Sorry about that.
Three.
And you've had a lot of endorsements from mayors too, early on.
Yeah.
You know, you unorthodoxly, you threw your hat in the ring really early.
Yes.
And you also, I think you're the first one to give a pick for lieutenant governor.
Correct.
Before getting a nomination. Those things you always thought of doing?
Well, the mayor's component is really important because I thought from the beginning that mayors have a lot of credibility. So I didn't really care as much. But well, I didn't think about it. I didn't think it was relevant really county commissioners or assembly people or senators. I thought that a mayor has a special relationship with their constituents because it's a personal vote. You ask a grade school child, they'll know who the president is and they'll know who their mayor is, right? And so I thought that when a mayor says, whether it's Shelley Brindle or Dahlia Vertrees or you name them, John Hornick, and says, I understand the landscape, but Steve Fulop is the best for Marlboro, and this is the reason why, it carries a different sort of weight. And so we built it around that, and even despite the fact that I'm in this change lane against the politics in New Jersey, you have a huge number of labor and mayors that are standing with me, which should tell you something.
Yeah, no, that's great. As governor, well, as mayor, you make a lot of decisions. As governor, you make even more.
Yeah.
A lot of them are the priority of investing. And I've heard you speak about investing in the next generation is non-negotiable. And by that, you mean the kids.
Yeah.
You know, in Jersey City with education, you started universal pre-K, you put more money into the schools, you expanded after-school programming. What are some of the things that you want to do to strengthen public education to make sure every kid in New Jersey has a pathway to success?
I think the school funding formula needs to change entirely. Special education needs to be funded by the state, not the local municipalities. That's cost, and that speaks to opportunity. I think we need to revisit early childhood care and early childhood development.
What does that mean? How do you do that?
Well, I think you got to think about tax credits, and you got to think about how do you incentivize municipalities to open more facilities. Today, the structure in Trenton is based on enrollment, okay, and it's on attendance as opposed to enrollment, and that needs to ultimately change because there's not an incentive for people to open a facility because of the uncertainty around getting money. And I think understanding that from a local standpoint can help us drive a little bit better on some of those solutions. And then, higher education. It's a big part of the education conversation. You need some consolidation in the space. I think Rutgers betting tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into sports as opposed to academics is misguided. I think the Rutgers board has become very political and not necessarily academics. And all those things drive cost. I mean, Rutgers in-state tuition, room and board, you're at $40,000. It's a wild thing.
In-state.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy situation, right? Most people don't realize that. It's got away from us relative to other states. So you need to revisit a lot of these things, and I think I'm kind of uniquely situated to do that.
Yeah. School funding, equity. It's always a top issue. It's always a complex issue, a complicated issue. How would you fairly distribute resources to make sure that those underserved districts get the money they need?
I think the funding formula needs to contemplate which districts have higher poverty rates, ESL, are working towards desegregation of the schools, shared services. So what doesn't happen today in Trenton is that you may have the governor say this is the objective or the mission that his administration wants to pursue, and then there's no carrot or stick if you do or you don't with regards to municipalities. You need to really have an incentive, and understanding local government, I think, is part of it. So if the objective is to desegregate the schools, or the objective is to create better opportunities around equity, or the incentive is to build more facilities, those districts or municipalities that are driving at that goal need to share better in the pot, because that'll drive them more towards continuing that sort of objective. It doesn't happen today, and I think that we would change it to achieve that ultimately.
Gotcha. You know, a few minutes ago you mentioned Rutgers and breaking things up a little bit. I've heard you say similar about the Board of Public Utilities.
Yeah.
Could you speak about that a little bit before we delve into climate and energy prices?
Look, I think the energy situation here in New Jersey is a byproduct of a lot of different things, but part of it is that the BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, has become a dumping ground for former politicians. I'm not an energy expert. I'll be the first to tell you, okay? And I know that the BPU is not energy experts either anymore.
There's been a few there. Gene Fox was a former president of it,
but by and large, okay? And so you get into this situation where you're being blindsided with 20% increases, largely because there hasn't been effective energy planning for a long time. The other thing I would tell you is I'm different than the other candidates in that I bend more towards renewable energy. And when the other candidates say, well, we need to have an all hands on deck approach in the short term and do fossil fuels or build natural gas, I don't subscribe to that. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 1-year-old. I think a lot about what the world will look like with the climate change conversation for them. I see flooding issues in Jersey City that are prevalent. And I think that we need to push aggressively into the renewable conversation, even if it's difficult in the next 3 or 4 years when you have a president that doesn't believe in climate change.
Well, we had a president who took all the money out of offshore wind funding, and that's after the last election. The anti-offshore wind people tried pushing a lot of misinformation out there, so you have that against.
So I would say that offshore wind, which I'm a big supporter of, will likely not happen because the president isn't supportive of it. But New Jersey could be taking proactive steps over the next 3 years in order to set up the procurement, the legal aspects, in order to move forward, educate the public, because there's a lot of misinformation, out there. So I don't think New Jersey is doing any of that stuff today, and I think it's a huge missed opportunity. So when you have a Democratic president that comes in hopefully in 2028, they're going to be behind the ball again because we haven't done the preparation under the Murphy administration.
And a lot of those offshore wind companies are foreign, so they don't understand the politics of our, of our state.
But they could hire people, or they could spend some money to educate people. It's not rocket science, right? And I think that it's a missed opportunity because the dialogue has gone sideways with regards to what this could actually mean to New Jersey.
No, I love hearing that you're all for renewables. You mentioned the energy pricing coming up. It's going to hit soon. It's going to hit hard, 20%, and people are going to see that in their bills every month coming up. I'm sure the Republicans are going to make that a big part of their platform. So the question is, how do you beat back that, whose fault that is, and how do you also do those things to actually make it better for people to afford?
Let me tie this into the election for a second, Josh. That 6 candidates running for Democratic nominee, all 6 of us can't win. That's for certain. And I would suggest to you that the candidates that are the most establishment machine candidates have the least likelihood of success, for the reason that there hasn't been a third term Democrat in 70 plus years. And the reason is because you're going to be defending a Phil Murphy agenda. Jack Ciattarelli's biggest talking point come September, October, November is that this person represents 4 more years of Phil Murphy. And if you're the machine candidate in that situation, okay, there's a North Jersey machine candidate and a South Jersey machine candidate. If you are one of those 2 machine candidates, there's 0 chance of success because you have the same lobbyists, the same consultants, the same infrastructure that you can't walk away from it. I'm unique in the sense that I am in a political reform lane. So I acknowledge the fact that the party's broken. We have some great activists in our party, some great ground troops, but the reality is the leadership has become lobbyists and monetizing the system for themselves. And if you don't acknowledge that a lot of the systemic issues here are because of Democrats, you're going to have a problem being successful in November. So whose blame is it? I think that the reality is that it's shared blame. It's Trenton, but Democrats particularly Phil Murphy and some Democrats have had leadership there for some time. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that fact because you're beholden to them, you're not going to start in a place of being able to move people. Because if you're solely trying to defend 8 years of Phil Murphy, it's going to be a loser in November. Yeah. And I think I'm unique on that situation. So we'll see.
You mentioned the political machine. You've long fought them at times.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when people talk about it from a campaign fighting the political machine, people don't understand what the tangible benefit of it has in their day-to-day lives. But I think you're talking about that right now.
I mean, look, the reality is that you have party bosses that have controlled the system and monetized a lot of it in their personal way. So if you think about, you have lobbyists controlling the system. Mm-hmm. And it's unique to New Jersey. No other state looks like that. So if you
I tried to explain the line to people for years. I didn't realize it wasn't a New Jersey thing when I first went other places. And it's
unique. And I tell you that if you think about it, having a lobbyist as a party chair, just think about this for a second, right? You know, on one hand, you're going to be accepting dollars, let's say, from Horizon, because that's your lobbyist profession. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, you're talking to the Democratic constituencies that you represent and saying, we're for insurance reform. Now, in that world, you're either lying to your client or you're lying to your constituency. You can't have both. And my point is that the public pays for that in a corruption tax every single year. And they talk about affordability crisis. All of this stuff is interconnected, and I think we need to really speak to correct that.
Yeah, so the county line is gone, but there's some other things that I think you want to get in there with. One of them is senatorial courtesy, and also I've heard you speak about ranked choice voting, which we see across the river in New York.
Ranked choice voting is paramount. Senatorial courtesy is probably a process that a normal person would say is wrong, but I don't think that the legislature would ever change that, because it's not law, it's a courtesy that they do to each other. Ranked choice voting is the natural next step in the Democratic conversation in New Jersey. It would create more balance.
Do you want to explain what that is a little bit?
Yeah, it basically means that, you know, instead of voting for one single candidate, you preference who's your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. And what that does is may not allow you to get your first one all the time. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But what it allows you to get is not a fringe candidate that is totally not consistent with your core beliefs, because maybe you'll get somebody that doesn't fit everything, but that's acceptable to you. And what that tends to happen is it wrestles power away from these party bosses, from the fringes, and ultimately gets to a place where a person can govern a little bit effectively because the coalition is bigger.
Gotcha. You know, we've gone this whole time barely talking about President Trump, which is amazing in a conversation about politics. You know, every one of you running for governor on the Democratic side is talking about standing up to Musk, standing up to Trump, fighting Trump. Is there anything that makes you different that you've actually done to talk about that in Jersey City or in general?
Well, look, I think everybody says the same sound bites. I mean, I was sued for years by Jared and Charlie Kushner over a building and a tax abatement. We fought them and we ultimately won it. But I don't think that, yes, I feel that Trump undermines our Constitution. I feel like he's in a danger to a lot of
voting rights, abortion access,
everything. I mean, talking about a third term, taking a plane from Qatar, like you name it.
To keep it afterwards.
I mean, it's a crazy thing, right? However, we also need to think about the fact that there are a lot of independents and Republicans that voted for Trump in New Jersey. And so when you get into the November election, it's not going to be only a referendum on Trump, because the people that feel like we feel are going to be with us already. Mm-hmm. And again, it's going to be a conversation around buses, taxes, trains, schools. That's what people are going to vote on, because you need to be able to move the middle, the independent voters. And I think I'm unique in that situation, because I'm coming from a place that isn't the political establishment. I'm coming from a place with a lot of experience as a mayor and a lot of results. And I'm coming from a place where I know I can move people if we get into a room without sacrificing immigrants, LGBTQ, because you need to defend those people as well. It's an important part of this conversation.
Well, that's the big thing, you know, trans rights, LGBTQ, they're under attack in school boards, state houses.
Yeah.
What would you do to ensure New Jersey remains a national leader in equality and protection?
Well, let's talk about the schools for a second. Okay. You know, a year ago, you would never imagine that the federal government would get rid of the Department of Education, right? And then Trump starts down this road, and a lot of elected officials sends out press releases saying, we need to fight him. And that goes back to kind of the difference between us and the others. They say these platitudes with no real specifics. If you think about the state constitution in New Jersey, there is real there's very little that defines what education is in New Jersey, okay? Other than the fact that it says everybody's entitled to
a lot of school districts, but
yeah, we have a lot of school districts, and it's a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And what President Trump has done is he has redefined what education looks like nationally and what an executive is capable of doing around education. And I think Phil Murphy and the legislature should be more proactive with constitutional amendments to define what education looks like in New Jersey. Does religion have a place in it? Mm-hmm. I think we know what the answer should be to that. How about bullying issues? How about outing kids? Like all of those things you can define, and we should put up guardrails. We should be learning, and while we have Democrats in Trenton in the state Senate, Assembly, and governorship, we should be more proactive doing things to protect our values. The Immigrant Trust Act, great example.
Not everyone's for that running for governor.
No, I mean, like, this is a big disconnect between me and some of the others. You know, when Alina Habba said 3-4 weeks ago that she would investigate Phil Murphy over his immigration policies, that was the moment for Phil Murphy to push the Immigrant Trust Act if he hadn't already, because it speaks to our values in New Jersey.
Why do you think he
did? I think that Phil Murphy at times is risk averse and conflict averse. And I think that you have a lot of politicians, some of them running for governor, these moderates that think about the fact of saying that I'm going to stay close to the middle because of what a poll says. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be. And I think that if you are close to the middle and you think a moderate will win, you're misguided. I would say that Kamala lost in November for a lot of different reasons. If we were to talk about it.
Yeah, this could be another hour are we talking about this.
I mean, look, you could, sexism was part of it and racism was part of it, and she had a short runway to organize a campaign, all of that. But also, she couldn't articulate a clear vision that was different than Joe Biden.
She was asked at The View and
she
couldn't give the answer.
She couldn't give the answer, and I think we have candidates that can't give that vision today. And then at the same time, she allowed herself to get beat up over vulnerable communities that she should have defended. She didn't know how to defend them appropriately and pivot the conversation to talking about things that are relevant around taxes and housing or anything else. And we have candidates that could be the nominee in New Jersey that are very, very similar in how they respond to things or don't respond to things. And I think it's a dangerous place for us. Stakes are very high.
You have to give people a reason to vote for you, not
Correct.
just point out the other side.
Yes, and this is going to be a tough election because Jack Ciattarelli is going to be a tough candidate to beat.
You know, you mentioned immigration. New Jersey, everyone from somewhere else. You know, like I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors. You have a similar story.
Yeah, similar.
How has it affected you or impacted the way you view the world as a father, as a mayor, maybe as a governor?
Yeah.
Especially the world we're in right now with everything.
So I come from a family of Holocaust survivors like you. My family's immigrants. My mom worked in immigrant services, as I touched on earlier. When I got elected in Jersey City, we established an immigrant office, which is now the only nationally accredited immigration office in a municipal building in the country. We've been at the forefront of the refugee resettlement program for Afghanistan and Ukraine and New Jersey.
You're in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, where so many of us
leaned into this immigration issue aggressively. And I think there's a lot of things that Phil Murphy can do, or the governor, that we're not doing. So we talked about the Immigrant Trust Act for sure. There's a lot of nonprofits in New Jersey that have seen their funding dry up, and they do work, some of them for legal immigrants, connecting them into society here in New Jersey that no longer have funding. We should be demonstrating with our values how we act on that. Obviously, the Attorney General is important, that we need a strong Attorney General with continuity from today. I stand alone.
Yeah, others are not for Matt Plotkin to still be AG.
Look, I've never had dinner with the guy in my life, okay? But I think that continuity from a litigation standpoint is super important to protect New Jersey. And then I think there's things that, like, Phil Murphy could be doing today to demonstrate our values. I'll give you an example, like the DMV or the Motor Vehicle Commission, right? Whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, everyone still calls DMV.
Yeah, the DMV is, you know, if you look at kind of their revenue, I mean, they have a line item where they make money from selling data, selling our data, right, to data brokers. And in a place like New Jersey, where undocumented immigrants have access to driver's license, there is an ethically and moral question around, should we be doing that, right? And the answer is probably no. Right,
especially with everything going on right now.
Absolutely, and those are steps that I would do. But I think Phil Murphy should be doing more from a leadership standpoint. And I think sometimes, you know, again, risk averse and conflict averse.
Gotcha. If you were to become governor, it's an exciting time to be it. It's the semi-quincentennial of our nation, the 250th. It's going to be right here.
The World Cup.
The World. I'm saying you played soccer. We realized we played soccer against each other probably in high school.
We did.
So you would be the governor when the World Cup is here as well. So I mean, how would you lean in that first year to these amazing opportunities for our state?
I mean, the biggest risk is the transportation conversation. I mean, you're looking at an issue coming with the World Cup where you have Newark Airport totally dysfunctional.
And there's no parking, I believe, for the World Cup. They're not going to have there.
And so you're relying on mass transit, and you're relying on New Jersey Transit, which has been a nightmare and dysfunctional. And so the risk is very high that it's going to be embarrassing for New Jersey. And my hope is that, Phil Murphy and his team is digging into that now, thinking about it. I have to believe that they are. And whoever the next governor is will have a short runway to make sure that the plans are effective. Otherwise, it's going to be a black eye for the state of New Jersey, and unfortunate.
And hopefully not, because it's an amazing opportunity for us to have those finals.
Huge.
We're wrapping up soon, and for voters just tuning in before the debate who still might be undecided, what are those last-minute messages you want them to hear from you? Like, what makes you the best candidate to lead New Jersey for the next 4 or 8 years?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I touched on some of them. First of all, I think experience as an executive is crucial, and I stand alone on that. And I touched on that a little bit earlier. I think the political reform is necessary in New Jersey. I think I stand alone in that. I think substance and details about how we're going to fix these things as opposed to platitudes, I stand alone in that. And then finally, I think not all 6 of us can win. And I touched on that earlier. I think there is a big risk and the stakes are high. And I think that if you're objective about it, I think because of the lane of political reform that we're in, I have the best opportunity to win in November.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for taking the time. Next few weeks are going to be a little busy for you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's been wonderful, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks. To learn more about Stephen Fulop's campaign for governor, please go to stephenfulop.com. I'm Joshua Henney. Thanks so much for watching.
When I got home from Iraq, some said I couldn't take on the political machine. They said I couldn't defeat an incumbent mayor, or pass the toughest ethics laws in state history, or take on Bob Menendez, or Donald Trump. And they said I couldn't pass some of the most progressive laws in the country. But since when did anyone in New Jersey let someone else tell them what they can or can't do?
I'm Steve Fulop, and I'll be a governor on nobody's side but yours.